The factory moaned through the night, a slow metal groan stretching across the plain like something wounded. Inside, steam rose from rusted joints and conveyor belts moved with a stubborn drag, as though resisting their own purpose. Kofi stood between two mold presses, face wet with sweat and machine mist, his hands wrapped in oil-stained gloves that hadn't been replaced in months. Around him, men shouted in a language that still clung awkwardly to his tongue, voices booming and sharp. But Kofi never raised his voice. He never needed to. They called him Kristof here. Not out of malice. Just ease. And because no one had ever asked what his name actually was. When the shift bell rang, the factory gates opened like a sigh. Kofi walked home beneath flickering street lamps, past shuttered kiosks and graffiti that used to mean something before time blurred it all into angry scribbles. Snow clung to the edges of the pavement in gray lumps. He adjusted the strap of his satchel and climbed the 6 flights of concrete stairs to the top of the ship, the apartment block so named for its rust-colored stairwells and tilted hallways. Inside, the apartment was quiet. Kwame lay on the couch under a heavy blanket, the soft light of the kitchen spilling across his face. His school bag sat crooked by the door, its zipper torn, one strap nearly ripped off. Kofi didn't ask. Not yet. He sat on the edge of the sofa, removing his boots slowly. His feet throbbed, and his back was bent with a day's silence. He reached out and brushed a smudge of dirt from his son's temple. The boy stirred but didn't wake. In the morning, Kwame moved around like a bird with a bent wing. He avoided eye contact, dressed quickly, and stuffed the broken backpack into his coat. When Kofi offered to patch it, the boy only mumbled, "Don't bother. It's not worth fixing." And before Kofi could reply, the door clicked shut. That afternoon, Kofi walked to the school. It was a squat, concrete building ringed with cameras and silence. The receptionist barely looked at him before buzzing the principal's office. Inside, a tall man with pale hands and tired eyes motioned him to sit. "We're aware of the situation," the principal said in that tone officials used when they wanted you to feel both heard and dismissed. "Boys will be boys. Tensions sometimes flare. Your son may have misunderstood the intent." Kofi blinked. He came home with blood on his collar. A nosebleed, nothing more. The other students involved regret the misunderstanding. No one meant harm. The man slid a paper across the desk. "We've prepared a report. If you're willing to sign it, we can ensure things don't escalate unnecessarily." Unnecessarily. That night, Kofi stood in the kitchen holding the unsigned paper, staring at the words like they might rearrange themselves. He could hear Kwame in the other room, muttering to himself in 2 languages, English and the clipped syllables of his mother's Chui. The boy had taken to whispering her name sometimes when he thought his father couldn't hear. The paper didn't burn easily. It curled first, like it was afraid to die, before the flame finally devoured the words. Kofi stood over the sink watching the ashes fall, and for the first time in years, his hands trembled, not from fatigue, but from memory. He had heard those same words before. Misunderstanding. Escalation. Back in Kumasi, when the university dean had warned him not to march. When soldiers had come with sticks instead of questions. When silence had been the only door left open. He had closed it behind him. And now, years later, in a frozen country where even the air felt borrowed, that door had creaked open again quietly, like a whisper between heartbeats. Kofi turned off the light. He stood in the darkness a moment longer and let it surround him. Kofi's fingers curled tighter around the lunchbox in his hand as he waited by the school fence. Through the slats, he could see students emerging in clusters, laughing, yelling, retreating into their own world. Kwame was last, alone, the hood of his coat pulled up so tight his face disappeared into it. When he reached his father, he didn't speak. Just nodded. They walked home without a word. The city had the air of something bracing for a storm, low clouds pressing against chimneys, cold wind cutting between rows of shuttered stalls. Kofi's breath came out in short clouds. Kwame's, not at all. Only when they reached the apartment did the boy speak. "I can handle it," he said, barely above a whisper. Kofi looked at him, heart heavy with all the things he knew and all the things he hoped weren't true. "Handle what?" Kwame dropped his bag, the ripped strap now stitched hastily with fishing line. It was a joke. That's what they said. Who? Kofi asked. His voice was sharper than he intended. Kwame flinched. The boys in the locker room. They just play rough sometimes. There was a long silence. The kind that wasn't really empty. Kofi felt something shift between them, something delicate and sharp, like glass turned in the hand. Kwame went in his room, shutting the door with more softness than was natural, as though afraid the sound might accuse him. Later, when Kofi unpacked the boy's lunchbox, he found uneaten bread crushed into the corner. And under it, a folded piece of lined paper. No name, no date, just one sentence, scribbled in jagged handwriting. Go back to the jungle, monkey. Kofi didn't sleep that night. He sat by the radiator, the note crumpled on the floor. Memory dragged him back, through time and ocean, to red dust roads, protest chants, and the metallic stench of tear gas. To a narrow dormitory hallway in Kumasi, where students were dragged out one by one. Where he had hidden under a bed while his friend Daniel had been taken. Where no one had come back the same. He had come here to erase those years. Not because they didn't matter, but because they had swallowed so much already. And now the same language, the same humiliation, just under a different sky. The next morning, Kofi returned to the school. This time, he demanded a meeting with the boys' parents. The principal smiled with tight politeness. It's better to keep things calm, he said. This town isn't used to confrontation. Surely you understand. No, Kofi said. I don't understand. There are procedures. There is truth. The principal shifted in his chair. Let's not make this a political matter, Mr. Kristof. My name, Kofi said, voice low, is not Kristof. The silence that followed felt dangerous. You must think of your son, the man finally said. You're not from here. These things, they don't go away if you push. Kofi stood. They don't go away if you don't. He left the paper inside again. That evening, the factory supervisor pulled him aside in the locker room. Heard some noise from the school, the man said casually, toweling off his hair. Didn't figure you for the activist type. Not good for someone in your position. Kofi said nothing. Just stared at the rows of metal lockers, all identical. All locked. That night, Kwame sat beside him on the couch. The boy had his mother's eyes, wide and thoughtful. Do you think it'll stop if we leave? Kofi looked at him, the words catching like thorns in his throat. No, he said. It stops when we stop hiding. But the fear didn't leave him. Not even a little. Because even truth, he knew, could be a trap. The cold gave way to fog the next morning, thick enough to blur outlines, turn buildings into whispers. Kofi stood at the window with a mug of lukewarm tea, watching the mist swallow the schoolyard across the street. He remembered heat. Not warmth, but Ghanaian heat, dense, relentless, full of breath and dust. He had once stood in a different kind of window in Kumasi, sweating through a cotton shirt, the smell of pepper soup wafting through narrow alleyways, while students filled the streets outside chanting for tuition fairness and academic freedom. Back then, his voice had rung out like thunder. We will not pay for chains disguised as books, he had shouted, standing on the steps of the administration building. There had been thousands of them, fists raised, signs lifted. And Daniel, always Daniel, beside him, fearless and brilliant, a fire in his eyes that could not be extinguished. It wasn't the soldiers who frightened Kofi in the end. It was what they did after the crowds dispersed. He remembered the clatter of boots on tile, the choke of tear gas, Daniel's scream when they dragged him out of the lecture hall. They broke his jaw, his ribs, but not his spirit. Daniel refused to sign the apology letter. Kofi had signed it. Not because he didn't believe, but because he had seen what happened to those who resisted. And because his Amma, had found out she was pregnant. That changed everything. Now, the fog clung to the school fence, and Kofi stood in a borrowed country with a borrowed name, listening to his son's breath in the next room. The boy had stopped talking at meals, stopped humming in the shower. The light behind his eyes was still there, but it had dulled, like a candle watched too long in silence. At work, things changed too. The line supervisor who used to nod at him now didn't look up when passing. His locker had been moved to the far end of the corridor. His work gloves disappeared. When he reported it, the manager shrugged. Keep your head down, Kristof, he said. Don't make trouble. Trouble. That word again. They had used it back in Ghana, too. Amma had warned him. Back when they scraped together the money for the flight. They won't see you as clean, Kofi. Just invisible. Until you speak. He had promised her safety. And for a while, he had kept it. Until now. One night, Kwame came home later than usual. His coat was wet. His cheek scratched. When Kofi asked what happened, the boy said nothing. Just walked past, quietly shutting his bedroom door. The silence afterward was unbearable. Kofi reached for his old tin box, the one Amma had brought with him from Accra. Inside were letters, folded photos, the only newspaper clipping from the day of the university protest. And at the bottom, a half-crumpled flyer in faded red ink. Student Voices Against State Violence. Kofi Owusu to speak at noon. He hadn't seen his own name printed in over a decade. It looked like someone else's. Someone braver. Someone lost. That night, he walked to the edge of the abandoned train yard, stood among the rusting carriages. He lit the flyer with a match, watched the flame lick across his name. He expected it to feel like closure. But instead, it felt like a betrayal. Because hiding had not protected them. It had only delayed the wound. Back home, Kwame stood in the hallway waiting for him. His voice, when it came, was barely more than a murmur. They poured water on my books. In the bathroom. Then laughed. Said my skin was waterproof. Kofi's jaw clenched. Why didn't you tell me? Kwame shrugged. You wouldn't have done anything. Kofi's breath caught. You never do. And then the boy turned and walked into the dark, leaving the door ajar, just enough for his words to echo in the empty hall. It started with the gloves. When Kofi arrived at the factory that morning, the box of communal gloves was empty. Again, he asked around, but the replies were shrugs, glances away, or silence. A coworker named Lejos, who used to share cigarettes during break, now barely nodded. Kofi stood at his machine barehanded, the cold steel biting his fingers until the skin cracked. He didn't complain. By midweek, he found graffiti on his locker door. A crude sketch, a figure with a bulging nose and exaggerated lips, hanging from a tree. Below it, in misspelled letters, Jungle Man Go Home. The manager said it wasn't a police matter. It's just boys being stupid, he said. You don't want to create a situation, do you? Situation. Misunderstanding. Escalation. The words always pointed in one direction. That evening, as he exited the building, a woman waited outside near the fence. Pale coat, designer scarf, heels unsuited for the gravel lot. Kofi recognized her from a staff photo on the school website, Agata Varga, mother of one of Kwame's classmates. Her son, if he remembered correctly, had stared a little too long when Kofi came to parent-teacher night, smirking behind a folded notebook. You're the African man, she said flatly, without greeting. Her accent clipped, sharp. Kofi gave a cautious nod. She took a step closer. My boy told me what your son's been saying. That he was attacked. That we're racists. Kofi didn't reply. You know, some people come here and try to fit in. Others, she let the sentence dangle. If your son's unhappy, maybe this isn't the right place. Kofi's throat dried. He wants to learn. We all want things, she said. But we must know our place. That's how the world works. Then she walked away, heels clicking like gunshots. Inside the apartment, Kwame sat at the table drawing. The paper was a swirl of lines, dark trees, heavy shadows, a lone figure walking into them. Kofi sat across from him, but didn't speak. He traced the boy's outline with his eyes, the tightness in his shoulders, the way he pressed the pencil too hard. Not a child anymore. Not yet a man. And already cornered. That night, Kofi opened a browser on his ancient laptop. The key stuck. The screen flickered. He searched for lawyers. Advocacy groups. Anything. Most sites were in the local language. The ones that weren't had broken links or outdated addresses. One had a hotline number. He dialed. The woman who answered had a soft voice. Yes, we help people facing discrimination. But cases involving minors are delicate. You must be careful, especially if you're not a citizen. I have residency, Kofi said. Still, she said gently, the burden of proof is high. Are you sure you want to go forward? These things don't always end cleanly. Kofi looked at his son's closed door. Yes, he said. I'm sure. The next morning, he called the school and requested a meeting with the local board. They said there would be a process, a file, a mediation. No one said justice. As the days passed, tension tightened around them like a noose. Anonymous notes slipped under the door. Stop the lies. Your son brings shame. Someone spat near their mailbox. On the bus, Kofi felt eyes on his back, like heat from a hidden flame. And yet, something else began to change. At school, one teacher, an older woman who taught literature, pulled Kwame aside after class. Give him a book. Baldwin's The Fire next time. No words. Just a nod. A boy in the hallway fist bumped him when no one was looking. Small things. Flickers. But real. At home, Kwame started humming again, just barely. A tune Kofi remembered Amma singing while washing clothes by the old clay basin back in Kumasi. One night, the boy said quietly, I want to write about it. About what? What happened? To me. To us. Kofi hesitated. They won't like that. I don't care, Kwame said. I'm tired of being something I'm not. And in that moment, something cracked open. Not a wound, but a door. Just slightly. Just enough to let the light in. The call came on a Thursday, just after Kofi's shift ended. He was still in the locker room when the number flashed across his phone. Unfamiliar, local, urgent. When he answered, the voice on the other end was tight, efficient. This is the school nurse. Your son is at the regional hospital. He was involved in an incident. Kofi's feet moved before his brain caught up. He didn't hear the rest. Didn't change clothes. The bus ride blurred, his breath fogging the glass as gray apartment blocks slid past. The hospital was a squat, peeling building, its windows smudged and tired. He found Kwame in the hallway outside the trauma unit, his face swollen. When I nearly shut, gauze taped to his brow. Dried blood crusted his lip. His arms trembled. They jumped me again, Kwame said, his voice flat. In the locker room. 5 of them this time. Kofi reached out. The boy flinched. But only for a second. They said I thought I was better than them. Said I was dirty. That my skin spreads disease. Kofi's hands tightened around the hospital chair. Did anyone help you? A janitor pulled them off, Kwame said. No teachers. They were gone. A doctor entered with a clipboard, eyes guarded. Your son has a mild concussion. Some bruised ribs. We filed a report. Kofi nodded, hollow. That evening, Kofi requested a copy of the hospital file. He read it 3 times. Each time, his breath grew shallower. Patient was involved in an altercation with peers. Self-reported antagonistic behavior may have contributed to the escalation. The language was sterile, familiar. It was the same vocabulary used back home, when soldiers beat students and called it disciplinary enforcement, when protesters vanished and were labeled missing by choice. History wasn't repeating. It had never stopped. Kofi left the hospital with Kwame bundled in his coat, his steps careful, uneven. The city outside was blanketed in snow now, fresh and heavy. But the cold didn't numb anything. It only preserved the hurt. At home, Kofi laid his son on the couch, covered him in blankets, then sat at the table with the hospital file, the unsigned school document, and a copy of The Fire next time, its corners worn from Kwame's hands. He turned on the lamp and began to write. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't even structured. Just a flood of truth. The names of the boys. The details of every attack. What the principal had said. What the nurse hadn't. What the system ignored. He wrote with shaking fingers, every word a wound reopening. He emailed the statement to the school board, the town newspaper, and the hotline lawyer. No replies came. But something shifted in the silence. At the factory the next morning, the manager waited by the time clock. He didn't smile. We received word, he said. From the school. From the council. You've made quite the fuss. Kofi said nothing. You're a guest here. Don't forget that. That night, Kwame turned to his father on the couch. You're not scared anymore, he said. Kofi didn't answer immediately. He looked at his hands, palms worn, still stained from years of metal and ink. I'm still scared, he said. But now I'm also angry. Kwame nodded. Me too. Kofi reached over, took his son's hand, held it like a rope tied across generations, across oceans, across everything that tried to break them. Outside, snow fell quietly, covering the street, the mailbox, the hate note someone had scrawled there the night before. But this time, Kofi didn't rush to clean it. Let them see what the world was. Let them know it was no longer invisible. The invitation came folded in 3, delivered without fanfare through their mail slot. No sender's name, just a letterhead from the town council and a polite request. Concerned parents and staff are invited to a public forum regarding recent events at the secondary school. No mention of Kwame. No mention of violence. Just events. Kofi placed the letter on the table beside the untouched dinner. Across from him, Kwame stared at it, then at his father. You don't have to go, the boy said. I know. But you're going anyway. Kofi nodded. They want quiet. We won't give it. The forum was held in the municipal building, the same one where Kofi had stood in line years ago to register his work permit. The walls were the same dull beige, the clock above the podium still 5 minutes slow. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, occupied by teachers, parents, and a few reporters from the local paper. At the back stood a group of boys Kofi recognized immediately. Their expressions were blank, almost proud. The moderator was a woman in her 50s with a neutral smile and the kind of voice that polished unpleasantness into civility. She thanked everyone for coming, emphasized unity and healing, and then opened the floor for remarks. One by one, they came forward. A teacher spoke about school discipline needing to be consistent and apolitical. A parent worried that the media attention was damaging the town's reputation. Another voiced concern about divisiveness being imported from outside. When Kofi stood, the room shifted. Not with gasps or movement. With stillness. Like something had entered that wasn't meant to exist there. He walked slowly to the front. Not because of fear, but to carry the weight properly. My name is Kofi Owusu, he began. Not Kristof. Not the African. Not that man. My name is Kofi Owusu. No one interrupted. I came here 12 years ago. I worked in your factory, paid taxes, shoveled snow, raised my son. I didn't expect praise, only decency. He paused, scanning the room. Some eyes met his. Most didn't. My son was attacked. Once, then again. Racial slurs, humiliation, violence. Your system, your administrators, asked us to stay quiet, to call it a misunderstanding. To forget. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. I know what forgetting costs, Kofi said. I come from a place where memory was beaten out of us. I once signed silence to save my skin. I won't do it again. The moderator rose slightly, her smile cracking. Mr. Owusu, we want to be respectful. You don't want respect. You want order. He turned back to the room. My son knows who he is. Do you? Are you the kind of people who punish honesty and protect cruelty? Or are you ready to look at yourselves and admit what you see? Silence. Then, faintly, a hand clapped. Then another. Then scattered applause. Hesitant. Uneven. But there. Afterward, as the crowd spilled out into the cold, a man in a gray overcoat approached. City official, by the look of him. You made quite a statement, he said. Kofi didn't answer. You know this might cost you, the man added. Your job, your apartment. Things move quietly in towns like this. Kofi stared at him, the fog of his breath between them. Then let them move, he said. I'm done hiding. At home, Kwame was waiting. He had watched the stream online. They won't forget, he said. No, Kofi replied. That's the point. Later that night, someone slashed their mailbox with a knife. Painted the word liar and read across the door. Kofi didn't clean it. In the morning, he stood beside it as parents walked by with their children. He looked each one in the eye and said nothing. Because some truths, once spoken, echo louder in silence. The eviction notice came 3 days after the town hall meeting. Taped crookedly to their door, typed in the same bureaucratic detachment as the school's earlier denials. The reason was vague. Violation of tenant cooperation agreement. No further detail. No signature. No appeal. Kofi read it twice, then peeled it off carefully, folding it into 4 neat squares. Kwame watched from the kitchen, eyes unmoving. "They want us out," the boy said. Kofi nodded. "They always did. At the factory, they didn't fire him. Not officially. The manager just stopped assigning him shifts. When he asked why, the answer came in shrugs and temporary restructuring. His name was quietly removed from the rotation list. The men he'd worked beside for years now walked past him like a stranger. The heat in their apartment was cut. A clerk claimed it was a system error. One morning, Kofi found the hallway window shattered. Beside it, in chalk, "Silence or ship out." The streets began to feel like mirrors turned inward. Shops where he once bought bread no longer served him. The librarian, once chatty and kind, looked through him like a smudge on glass. But even as the walls closed in, something unexpected took root. At school, a substitute history teacher read Kwame's short essay aloud in class. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs about what it meant to have 2 names, 2 histories, and how neither protected you from being erased. Some students laughed, but others didn't. The piece was published in the school's digital newsletter under the title, "A Better Name." The editor, a girl with thick glasses and a stutter, refused to take it down, despite pressure from staff. The post was shared, then reposted, and soon picked up by a small regional website. From there, a blogger translated it. Then another. Within a week, messages began trickling in. "Thank you for your voice. My father was beaten for speaking out too. I didn't know this happened here. I'm sorry. They weren't floods, but they were seeds." Kofi sat beside Kwame one evening as the boy scrolled through the comments. "You did this," Kwame said. Kofi shook his head. "You gave it a name." Late that night, an email arrived. From an old address. Ghanaian domain. A name Kofi hadn't seen in over a decade. "Daniel. Brother," it began. "I saw the article. Is it really you? After all this time? We thought you were lost. I want to speak. If you'll let me." Kofi stared at the screen until the words blurred. Amma had once said that grief was not an end. It was a doorway. The next day, a journalist came knocking. Young, eager, trying to mask his nerves. He asked Kofi for an interview. "People need to know," he said. "From you." Kofi agreed. He spoke not only of the school, the factory, the mailbox, but of Ghana, of exile, of silence, of a boy born between 2 countries and the bruise of becoming visible in both. The article ran under the headline, "A Name Returned. One Father's Stand in a Town That Wanted Him Silent." It didn't change everything, but it changed enough. That week, someone placed a small pot of marigolds on their doorstep. No note. Another neighbor, one Kofi had never spoken to, nodded at him in the hallway. Small things. Again, but this time, not flickers. Roots. Still, the threats didn't stop. A final letter arrived. Official. Cold. You must vacate the premises within 10 days. Noncompliance will result in forced removal. Kofi placed the letter next to the eviction notice, the hospital report, the school document, and Kwame's article. He stared at the stack. Then he reached for his coat. "Where are we going?" Kwame asked. Kofi smiled faintly. "To choose a new door." They left before sunrise. No bags. Just 1 suitcase each. Kofi carried the documents, proofs of silence and defiance alike. Kwame held his sketchbook. The door to their apartment creaked shut behind them like an old breath released. No one watched them leave. But Kofi sensed the weight of unseen eyes behind curtains. The train station was quiet, almost reverent in the early light. Snow clung to the platform edges. The announcement board blinked slowly, names of cities neither of them had seen. Kofi bought 2 tickets to one that sounded open. Not promising. Just open. They sat side by side, staring at the frozen rail stretching east. Kwame leaned his head on Kofi's shoulder. Will it be different there? Kofi took a long breath. Maybe not. But we won't arrive quiet. The train pulled away. The town shrank behind them, its gray buildings, its red letters still faintly visible on the walls of memory. Kofi didn't look back. They arrived in a smaller place with fewer eyes and more questions. A week later, Kofi found part-time work repairing freight containers at a port. He wore his own gloves this time. Kwame enrolled in a modest school where no one knew his name, which meant he could choose how to say it. And he chose it all. Kwame Owusu. In full. The school asked for documents. Kofi handed them over with a quiet smile. Real name, real dates, no pseudonyms. When they asked for a brief biography, he didn't mention the factory, the mailbox, the chalk. He wrote, former educator, translator, advocate. It wasn't a lie. It was the truth, finally allowed to breathe. The online essay continued to ripple outward. A journalist from a major city paper requested an interview. This time, they wanted Kwame. The boy asked his father, "Should I?" Kofi nodded. "If they hear you, they'll see me." In the interview, Kwame sat tall. He spoke calmly. He didn't dramatize. Just told it plain. The names, the bruises, the silence, the choice not to accept it anymore. The article was titled, "My Father Never Yelled." But they heard him anyway. It went viral. Messages came again from all over the continent this time. Some angry. Most not. One from a young man in Serbia. "I didn't know you could say these things out loud. I thought we had to just survive." Another from Ghana. "I remember Kofi Owusu. We thought he died. But he didn't. He just found a longer road." Kofi opened an email draft. To Daniel. Then paused. Instead, he clicked video call. When Daniel's face appeared, older, lined, but unmistakable, they sat in silence for a moment. Then both men laughed. Not loud. Just long. Like a thread had finally been picked up from the dust. "I never thought you'd speak again," Daniel said. "I never stopped speaking," Kofi replied. "I just ran out of people to listen." Later that week, father and son went to the embassy. The real one. Kofi filled out the form slowly. At the final field, name, as you want it printed, he hesitated only a moment. Then wrote, Kofi Owusu. He placed his thumb on the ink pad. Pressed it to the paper. The imprint dark, solid. The clerk took the sheet. Didn't flinch. Outside, Kwame waited on the steps. Drawing. A new scene this time, not locker rooms or chalk scrawls or cracked windows. But a tree. Full. Rooted. And a name carved into the trunk. He looked up as his father stepped into the sunlight. "Did you do it?" Kofi smiled. "I did." And they walked forward, no longer towards silence, but away from it.